Hello, you guys. So, this is kind of an impromptu live. It's been on my mind, and I decided to dig into it a little bit because I hear it mentioned around YouTube, and it's a conversation that's kind of disturbing for me, um, disturbing to me. So, it's a conversation about how some of the demands, right? Some of the demands that women are putting on men. Hi, Alicia. Hi, Caitlin. Some of the demands that women are putting on men, like that they fight, that they defend women and children, that they be responsible for the things that are wrong in the community, that responsibility falls toward them, and um, that they are responsible for building the community up, for leadership, provision, protection. There's an argument from people who, I mean, I'm not really like, because I'm not totally clear on what type of people these are. Maybe they're hoteps. I guess they would be considered hoteps, which is interesting to me. Or like super pro black. And in these particular spaces, they essentially say that men and women have equal responsibility for protection, provision, war, leadership, that the responsibilities are equal. And what they do is they reach into African history and they try to say that there are matriarchal um, Black societies. And there are some societies that typically come up when they have these conversations. So the Ashanti are a very popular one. If you guys know of any other societies that people are claiming are matriarchal or matrilineal, um, let me know. But I decided to just research this. Do you know what I mean? Because for me, when I hear men who, regardless of if they're saying it's because of they love Black people or, because they respect women or whatever it is, when I hear them essentially trying to make women either be accountable or share in their accountability as men, it kind of rubs me the wrong way. Because you guys know, like I said, traditionalism is a double-edged sword, right? So men love women who are traditional, and these particular men would say that that's white tradition. But I'm about to prove that there were no matriarchal societies, from what I could find in Africa. And I'm going to talk about the usual suspects, the societies that people claim were matrilineal or matriarchal, and how they're literally not that, and that men had the same jobs in Africa, right, historically, that the European men had, which is that you protect, that you build, that you provide, that these things never changed even in tribes like the Ashanti, which I think are the ones that are held up the most. But I'm definitely going to touch on some other tribes. I'm going to be talking a little bit about Egypt. I'm going to be talking a little bit about Kush, um, and the Kushite societies. I'm going to be talking a little bit about Akan from southern Ghana. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the Pabir from Northeast Nigeria. Y'all, I dug in the bag for this because I I don't know if it's just me, but I feel that no matter what group it is, right? If it be the we just want to integrate group, if it be the hoteps, if it be, the there's so many groups of Black men that are trying to find reasons. And this is not like my Black man doesn't do this, and the Black men that I associate with don't do this, but there are for sure Black men that are trying to find ways to get out of doing their job as men. Find ways to make it's not really the Black way. The Black way isn't that men do all this. They keep trying to find ways to just get out of the hard work because it is hard work. And let's just keep it real. If men operate as men, their job is very hard. So I can understand trying to find ways to wiggle out of it, saying the women are not worthy, or the women, I respect the women so much that I don't want to do my job. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's a little weird. So, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to touch on, okay, we're talking about Africa. I don't, we're not talking about the Mayans or the Aztecs or the Incas. We can have a conversation about American native cultures, but I'm talking about cultures from Africa. So let's just try to stay on topic. So let's talk about the Ashanti. Let's start with the Ashanti and then we'll talk about everybody else. Because the Ashanti people are often used as an example of matriarchs gone right, even though the Ashanti population is not matriarchal. In fact, it's the complete opposite of that. They're literally not a matriarchy at all. Okay. And even when they hold up, what is her name? Asanwa. Is that her name? Asanwa. Am I pronouncing that correct? Who is the queen or she wasn't even a queen, right? But she is called the queen mother who encouraged the men to stop being cowards. She called them cowards. I'm not calling them cowards. I'm going to read her speech for you guys, okay? Because she disrespected them. She honestly, reading her speech made me think of Cynthia G. Like, she was very disrespectful toward them in her speech because she was tired. Um, but even in those cultures, it's not a matriarch. So let's talk about the Ashanti first and foremost, right? So ultimately, how the Ashanti people work is it's not a matriarchy, not in the sense that we would think. What it happened is that men and women had separate jobs. Can you imagine that? Men and women had separate jobs. In the Ashanti culture, men and women have separate jobs, and they were parallel jobs, but they were different, meaning the jobs were equally valuable. This is going to start sounding like so-called white traditionalism, you guys. The jobs were equally valuable that men and women did, but they were not the same. Can you imagine that? The Ashanti people who are upheld as the matriarchal, so, proof that Black women should be doing the same thing that Black men do. So what ended up happening is that there were parallel leaderships. The women led the women in female issues. Okay. So if there was an issue that regarded children, rape, if a woman was raped, anything like that, the female leaders would deal with that, right? If it had something to do with domestic or anything that involved a woman. So if there were issues that involved women, right? Like I said, rape, domestic issues, things like that, then the Ashanti women leaders would manage those things. And if there were things that involved, war, right? War, things like that, then the Ashanti men, right? The Ashanti men would handle those things. So the Ashanti people are not a matriarch. They're actually pretty darn traditional. The only thing was that, and I think this is correct, the women were given charge over women's things. And those things, if you look at what the Ashanti do, have historically been very traditional. Things that relate to womanhood. All those things that we claim are white are the things that the women rulers of the Ashanti that they ruled over. And the men, they ruled over equally, because remember, the job is not less. That's an American thing, right? That's a European thing. The job of the women is not less. It was considered equal. But the jobs of men and women weren't the same. So to say that the Ashanti is example of a matriarch is very disingenuous, because those women did not do men's jobs. Those women leaders, they led over women. In fact, going back to going back to the conversation that the Queen Mother, who everybody likes to talk about, who rallied, the Ashanti warriors, who were men, mind you, the Ashanti warriors were men, they were not women. How she rallied them was that she disrespected them. I don't know if this is something that the super like ultra pro black Hotep people tell you. She disrespected them. That's how she got them to fight the British. She didn't speak life into them. She didn't coddle them. She didn't talk sweetly to them. And I'm going to read you her speech. It was pretty short and sweet. Her speech was pretty short and sweet. She said, how can a proud, this is verbatim what she said to the men to get them to fight. She said, how can a proud and brave people like the Ashanti sit back and look while white men took away their kings and chiefs? Notice she said she's talking to men because the war, the fighting, and the protection, remember, because in their culture, the women led over women's issues and the men led over men's issues, and war and protection were a man's issue. And the men were allowing their kings and their chiefs, so their male leaders, to be basically ran through by the British. Okay? The British were humiliating them. So she said, how can a proud and brave people like the Ashanti sit back and look while white men took away their kings and chiefs and humiliated them with a demand for the golden stool? The golden stool only means money to the white men. They have searched and dug everywhere for it. I shall not pay one, and she's talking about money, to the governor. If you, the chiefs of the Ashanti, are going to behave like cowards, this is what she said to them. And again, these people are not matriarchs. They call her the queen mother and all that, but people are distorting what this woman did. The women in their culture were leaders that were considered equal to the men, but they did not do war. That was the men's job. And when the men started to fail at protection, and when the men didn't want to fight, and when they started to become essentially bitches to white men, this is what she said to them. And I don't know if, like I said, the super pro blacks and the Hoteps are going to tell you this. She wasn't sweet. She didn't go, oh, brother, I know that you can do better. I know that all I need to do is support you. That's not what she did. What she did is she called them out for what they were. She called them cowards. She called them cowards. She said, if you, the chiefs of the Ashanti, are going to behave like cowards and not fight, she called them cowards for not being willing to fight. You should exchange your loincloths for my undergarments. And then she called them women. Her speech proves that there was a hierarchy and an expectation that men would defend their people. Her speech proves it. The kind of golden goose of the, super pro-black Hotep sphere. Her speech to the men proves. She said, you're just like a woman. You might as well put on my panties. That's what she said. If you're going to be cowards and you're not going to fight, you might as well wear my panties. This was the speech that this queen mother of Ghana, right, of the Ashanti people, this is the speech that she gave the men. She said, you should exchange your loincloths for my undergarments. This was the speech. It's crazy. And then when she had to rally, because remember, then they'll say, well, she went to war. Well, in fact, she motivated by calling them dumb 4,000 men to go to war. Let's be clear on what she did. She sent the men to war. She sent 4,000 men and made them go fight. And why did she do it? Not because that was her job, because in their culture, that was not her job. Her job was not to get the men to do their jobs. Her job, and women who were in leadership in this particular tribe, their job was to manage women's affairs. But when the men failed to do their job, she called them cowards and told them they should wear her panties. And the Hoteps and the super pro blacks, they're not reading this speech. They're not reading the speech. They're not keeping it real. They're saying this was a matriarchy and she's proof of something. She's proof that she got sick and tired of the men not doing their job. The men were charged with the same job in that community as white men are charged with in their community. So, this idea that in Africa it was a matriarchy and men and women both fought war and did stuff side by side, that is a lie. That's a lie. And this is just one example that I'm going to give today. This is just one example that I'm going to give today. Let's go to yet another example. But before we go to the other example, I want to talk about how the Queen Mother, right? How she, when she sent the men to war, what did she say? She didn't say, arise, women and men, and go to war. She said, arise, men, right? She said, it is more honorable to perish. It is more honorable for you to die than to be a coward that should be wearing my panties. Now, I'm not making this up. Y'all go look it up for yourselves. Okay? This is what she said to them in Africa. When I was reading the way that she was talking to these men, because she had to come out of her comfortable position of managing women to convince them to protect themselves and their people, she did give me Sin G vibes. I'm not gonna lie. Where's Cynthia? She gave me Cynthia G vibes because she called them cowards. She said they needed to be wearing panties. She said it was better that they be dead than do nothing. She said, arise, men. So clearly, there was a male female hierarchy where the job of fighting and dying and protecting was the job of men, not of women. And that is just speaking of the Ashanti or the Ashanti, depending on how you want to pronounce the name. Okay. So let's go to some other examples because I really want to debunk. I want to cut through. Like I said, it feels to me that there is an effort to figure out ways to not do their job. And y'all know I'm very traditional. But the next time somebody says I'm traditional in a white kind of way, I'm going to pull up all these historical receipts and I'm going to tell them I'm traditional in a very African kind of way. Okay? Stop expecting me to do things that even in Africa they weren't doing. Not one more person better tell me I'm traditional in a white European kind of way. Apparently, in Africa, the standards were the same. Even among the tribes that the ultra pro Black Hoteps claim were matriarchs and try to use as examples of what Black women should and shouldn't be doing. Let's go to another example because they call themselves Hotep, which is an Egyptian thing. Even though not one of us in America who are descendants of slaves have ancestral roots in flipping Egypt, but whatever. Let's just go with it. So let's talk about Egypt. Because the super duper ultra pro Blacks and Hoteps love the heck out of Egypt. So first of all, let's talk about this idea of Egyptian queens. It was almost never that there was an Egyptian queen. It almost never happened. And when it did happen, they were queen regents. And a queen regent means that, let's say, a king died and the successor to the throne, who was also a man, was not old enough to take the throne. So if you had a successor to a king who was not, or, a pharaoh who was not old enough to take the throne, then his mother would act as regent for him until he got old enough to take the throne. 98% of the little handful, little crummy, because it wasn't many of them in the first place, 98% of the so-called queens of Egypt were literally just regents waiting for their sons to get old enough so that they could take over the throne. Because power in Egypt was passed down through men, not women. Not women. In fact, it wasn't until, let's see, it wasn't until It wasn't until it was after Hatshepsut. It was after her. It wasn't until like around 3,000 years into the establishment of Egypt that you had two queens in all of Egypt who were actual pharaohs, who seriously had full power. And in a 3,000 year period, you had two pharaohs that were female in Egypt that had full power, ones that were not acting as regents for little boys who were just waiting to take over the throne when they became men. Two. So Egypt would be a very poor example, okay? Egypt would be a very poor, and then you had Cleopatra. Um, there were many Cleopatras, but the most famous of the Cleopatras wasn't even black, right? This was a whole Grecian woman. So before the Cleopatra who was white ruled in Egypt, you only had two Egyptian pharaohs that were female who were not acting as regents for a future king, simply not sitting there waiting for their sons to get old enough to take over the throne. So even in Egypt, because they call themselves Hotep, which is an Egyptian word, even in Egypt, men were responsible for provision and protection. So I feel like just trying to pass the buck to women, to get women to do men's jobs, which is to build, protect, and provide. Just build, protect, and provide. Build, protect, and provide. Can we say this as a group? Build, protect, and provide. Even in Africa, that is how it was done. Let's look at some other examples. Okay? Some other examples. So far we've looked at the Ashanti or Ashanti, depending on how you want to pronounce it. We've looked at them. We've looked at their queen mother and what she really said to them, which she disrespected those men for being off their job. We've looked at Egypt. So let's go into another African culture that is often upheld as an example that women should do the job of men. Another culture is the Akan. So the Akan kingdom was located in southern Ghana. And they were a matrilineal people, meaning that wealth was passed down based on who your mother was. And there were queen mothers who ruled alongside the queens. So she was considered a woman chief. Now, only in the case that the king's position was vacant did she ever actually run the society. Let's start there. And also, the only time that a woman could hold this was after menopause. Let me repeat that. She could only even hold the position after menopause, after she could no longer bear children. And it was only the elite women. So you had to be elite and you had to be past menopause. You could not have a risk of bleeding or becoming pregnant if you wanted to hold these positions. And I think the most important thing is that in this particular tribe, the women, right? Because there would be like a village queen, or she was called an Ohima. She was the female counterpart to the men, but her job was to create a separate hierarchy for women. Let me repeat this. Her job was to create and maintain a separate hierarchy for the women. So the day-to-day affairs of men and women were handled separately. Domestic issues, like if there was a problem in a marriage, rape, going back to just like the Ashanti people did it, just like the Asantis did it, right? All of those things were handled by the women. Whereas on parallel to that, things like war and political issues were handled by the men. And the women never were part of the troops because they got pregnant and they had periods, and they did not want pregnant women who were bleeding on the front lines. So the Akan people from South Ghana are also used as an example by these ultra pro-blacks and hoteps as an example that women should do men's jobs. But what they don't tell you is that the women were equal status if they were wealthy in society, but they had to be menopausal, meaning they had to no longer be able to bear children, and the only thing that they ruled over were other women. Any situation that 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 pertain to a woman, marriages, childbirth, domestic issues, rape. That's what they were over. But who did the fighting and the building and the protecting in the Akan culture? Who do you think did it, you guys? The men did it. The men. And this is in Ghana. These are Guyanese people. These are people from Ghana. So apparently, men protecting, building, and providing is not very white after all, because the only difference between what Africans did and what Europeans do is that the women were not degraded for being women. It was considered equally important that there be women to manage the affairs of women. It was considered to be important. In Africa, the job of women was not to be men. The job of women was to have what they are as women respected, to the point that there would be a queen in both the Ashanti or Ashanti, depending on how you want to pronounce it, and in the Akan cultures, the queens, those queen mother people, were put there to manage the affairs of women, and they were considered equally powerful to the men, but they didn't do men's work. The men still were in charge of protection, provision, and building. The men still were in charge of that. These were not societies where the women took over the protection, provision, and building roles. That's not what went on. Same thing in Egypt, which I've already discussed, but let's give another example, because I really want, this idea to this thing that we want to pass the buck to women to do things that women are not meant to do. That even in Africa, women weren't doing this. And to claim that it's a European ideology and it's holding Black men to a European standard is very disingenuous, and it's an outright lie if you actually look at how these cultures ran. It's something that's easy to say, but it does not hold water when you really investigate all of these tribes that they keep waving in our faces as examples. So let's look at another example. So the Pabir. The Pabir are from Nigeria. And even though there was a female monarch, right? Even though there could be female monarchs. So all of the leaders were not women, but there had a female monarch. But the only way that the woman could become a female monarch is if she had a connection with a former king. So essentially, only the daughters of the kings were allowed to be in power. And her entire council was men. It was a bunch of men. And her council was chosen by a man. And the man that chose her council was chosen by the king. By the king. And she had no decision making as far as who the next king would be. That was a power that was never given to her. In fact, the only thing that she did was that there was like a 7-day transition between like the king and the new king. Is her work was to be a part of that 7-day transition where the princes would become kings. And then once he was chosen, he would lead and she would lead alongside him. But she led alongside him with him being the person that was in charge of the protection, provision, and building. He was still in charge of all that. Now, in this particular kingdom, she was actually even considered subservient to the king, which is different from the other two that we talked about. So let us be very clear. Even though in that kingdom that she was privileged, and the women in that society, their power was really limited to managing what is woman's work. They did the domestic work, and the men took care of protection, provision, and providing. Protection, provision, and building. And this is in the Pabir kingdom. So even in those examples, it was not a matriarchy. This idea that Africa was a matriarchy is really because men don't want to hold the sole responsibility for when stuff goes south. Let's just keep it real. They are trying to get out of being responsible. They don't want to be the only people expected to fight. They don't want to be the only people expected to build. They don't want to be the only people. You know what I'm saying? Somebody brought up Amon-Irenas from the Kushites period of the Sudan. There were only, I believe, 7 queens in Kushite society in the entire history of the society. And they didn't rule for very long. They ruled for like 10 to 25 years. So these are exceptions to the rule. Almost everybody who ruled in Kush was male, except for 7 people. And because one of those women went to war, all of a sudden they're up in arms talking about, Amon-Irenas. She's an example that Africa's a matriarchy. No, the exceptions, they prove the rule. They don't make the rule. And what she did was she sent a bunch of men to do what? Protect. That's what she did. She sent a bunch of men to go fight. So why do I say this is so important? This is important, right? The Candaces, right? Or Candaces, exactly. And there were only like 7 of them, you guys. So why do I bring this up? I bring this up because it is not Eurocentric for Black women to have the expectation that within our community, there is protection, provision, and building by the men. And even in the examples that the super pro-Blacks and the super hoteps use to prove that women bear equal responsibility as men in those areas, when you really look at those societies, that is not true. That is not true. And I would like to go back to the words of the Queen Mother of the Ashanti people. And I would like to quote her verbatim. She said, "How can a proud and brave people like the Ashanti," you can put Black in place of Ashanti, "sit back and look while the white men took away their kings and chiefs?" She said they are literally snatching up the men, and you guys are just watching, and humiliated them with a demand for the golden stool. She's like, they don't even want you to rule over your own stuff. They're trying to get you to hand over your things to them. She said the golden stool only means money to the white men. They have searched and dug everywhere for it. She says, I won't pay anything to the governor. If you, the chiefs of the Ashanti, speaking to the men, are going to behave like cowards, because the Hoteps love the Ashanti people, maybe you're going to love them less. Because she called the men out for not doing their job. She said, if you are going to behave like cowards and not fight, you should exchange your loincloths for my panties. Well, she said undergarments, but I'm saying panties. She said, if you don't want to fight, you might as well put my panties on. Why? Because women don't fight. And that's all I'm going to say. It's not our job. It's not our job to fight white men for the liberation of Black people. That's not our job. It's not our job in Africa. It's not our job in America. And it's funny how everybody wants to be traditional until it comes to men being accountable for their side of traditionalism. And I am here to say the expectation of provision, protection, and building is as African as anything else. And so do not be shamed by somebody telling you you're being Eurocentric. You're not being Eurocentric. That woman wouldn't have been telling them they needed to wear women's panties if they didn't want to fight, if the women were fighting alongside the men. She said that because she said you're being girls. You're embarrassing yourself. You're cowards. I think she literally called them cowards. She said they were being humiliated. But you know the difference between those men and many of the conversations we have with men that don't understand this today is they got up and they started fighting. She gave that little tiny speech. It wasn't a long speech. They were like, panties, me? Never that. And they went out and fought. And when she sent the 4,000 men who she decided to lead over to fight, she said, arise, men. It is more honorable to perish. That's what she said. She didn't say arise, women. She said, get up, men. You're better off dead if you don't want to fight this war. And I rest my case there. Now, I am open to being proven wrong. Y'all prove me wrong. Show me the matriarchy in Africa. Show me the African women who were responsible for provision, protection, and building. I just looked at the Egyptians, the Ashanti. I looked at the Egyptians. I looked at the Ashanti. I looked at the who did I look at? I looked at the Egyptians, I looked at the Ashanti, I looked at the Kushites, I looked at the Akan people, I looked at the Pabir people. I've been all up and through Africa. I was in North Africa, I was in East, West Africa. I've looked all over Africa. I've yet to see this society where women, were warring with men and were responsible for protection and provision and building the same as men. I don't see these societies. So maybe y'all can get into the comment section and you can tell me what have I missed? Because when I look at these societies, it's looking pretty much like, like I said, the main difference is that women's roles were respected. That is probably the biggest difference. It was not considered substandard to manage domestic issues. It was not considered substandard. It was considered as important as the job that men did. But the men and the women had different jobs, even in Africa. So I don't know where this idea that women should be doing men's work, I don't understand where that's coming from. Maybe somebody can clarify it for me. Help me understand. So maybe tell me where I've missed something, because when I did my little research, I didn't come up with this society that, Black women are forcing men to be white men by asking them to provide and protect and to build. It seems like that's what men were doing in Africa. That was their job there too. And it also seems like y'all might want to put some respect on Cynthia G's name because y'all cannot be talking about the queen mother of the Ashanti people and hate Cynthia G at the same time, because she told them to put on panties and that they were cowards and that they were better off dead if they didn't want to fight. But she's the queen mother of the super pro-Blacks and the Hoteps, right? They love her. So they better love the way that she spoke to those men. I guess that was her version of speaking life into them, was calling them cowards, right? Telling them they needed to put on a pair of panties, telling them if they didn't want to fight, they were better off dead, telling them that they were being humiliated. That's how she got them to fight. the queen mother of the Ashanti people that everybody likes to bring up so much. It's funny, it wasn't coddling that she did. I just thought that that was so fascinating, y'all. You guys have to go read her speech. She was going in hard. Okay, she was not coddling or giving out hugs and kisses and pats on the head to anybody. It seems that some people have greatly misinterpreted what went on in Africa. Because the moment a woman had to come and rally the men to do something, she did not have a good attitude about it. She was real nasty toward them. Because why does she have to step out of her role, which is to manage women, to come and get you to do your job? That's what she said. Queen Mother in Ghana. So with that said, I'm about to get out of here, you guys. Um, I'm about to get out of here, and you guys enjoy your day. Let me know what you think in the comment section.